Hello, greetings from East Belfast in Northern Ireland. I hope you're all really well. My name is Jan Carson. I am a Northern Irish author, and I'd really hope to be with you at the festival in Tirana, but unfortunately I'm not. I'm here in Belfast today. And what I thought I would do instead is give you a little bit of an overview of my novel, The Firestarters. This is it in English, and it's just been translated into Albanian, and I really hope you're going to enjoy reading it. And I thought I would take some time to tell you about some of the themes that are covered in the novel and to read a few sections to you. And I hope it gives you a little taster of what The Firestarters is all about and maybe whets your appetite to jump in and read it for yourself. So the Firestarters is a magical realist text, and I'm going to talk about magical realism in a little minute, a little further. It's set in contemporary Northern Ireland, here in Belfast where I live, and particularly in East Belfast, which is a working class part of the city. Very close to the shipyards. There's two big yellow cranes just outside my door here, and those are the shipyards that the Titanic was built in. So there's a huge legacy of boat building and industry in this part of the city. As I mentioned, it's an almost entirely Protestant part of Northern Ireland, very working class, and very much impacted by loss of jobs and unemployment. So it can be quite a gritty place to live. The novel is set over a summer in what we call parade season, and parade season is the months of June, July, and August when the Protestant community marches and celebrates their culture, and that can quite often be a very fractured period in Northern Ireland. If there's going to be trouble or riots, it often happens in the summertime, and there's a helicopter over my house for most of the summer and a police presence on the street. During this particular summer, there has been a series of fires, and we here in the Protestant culture, we celebrate the Battle of the Boyne, which was a huge historical event back in the 17th century, where supposedly King Billy saved Ireland from Catholicism at a battle. And we celebrate that by lighting these enormous bonfires on the 11th of July, and then on the 12th of July there's a massive parade. But this summer in the novel, the bonfires are not just restricted to the 11th of July. As a kind of protest against the police restricting the size of the bonfires, there has been a spate of fires set across the city, and many of the beautiful historical buildings have been burnt down. The novel follows two fathers. Sammy, who's an ex-paramilitary, so he's been involved in the troubles and the violence, and he is horrified to find out that his son Mark is actually the one orchestrating these tall fires all over the city. So the novel follows his journey as he tries to decide what he's going to do about Mark. Is he going to report him to the police? Is he going to get involved? What's he going to do about his son's violence? The second father that we follow in the novel, is a man called Jonathan. And Jonathan is a family doctor, or a GP as we call them here. And Jonathan is quite a quiet, reserved man. And we discover quite early in the novel that he's had a strange experience. His element of the novel is the magical realist part. He's answered a house call, gone out, and he's been seduced by a siren, a mythical siren from kind of Greek folklore or even Celtic folklore. We have sirens in our Irish legend structure as well. And what happens to Jonathan is he stays with this woman for 9 months. She's pregnant very quickly, and she leaves him with a little baby, Sophie. And he is absolutely terrified because he's not sure if Sophie's going to be a siren or human. And the instant she begins to speak, she might cause massive destruction with what she says. So Jonathan's kind of issue in the novel is what to do about Sophie. What will be the implications of what happens whenever she begins to speak. So it's really a book about fathers and the responsibility they have for their children's actions. It's also very much a book about language, and I want it to begin there. In Northern Ireland, the Troubles very much had two communities, the Protestant and the Catholic community. It's become a lot more complicated since then, but there were always two sides to every story, two versions to things, and language was never a fixed thing. And I wanted to explore that in this novel. What does it mean when we have no fixed sense of history? And what does it mean when we don't even have a fixed sense of what words and language mean? And that has become kind of a thread going through Northern Irish history and culture. We don't have a museum of the Troubles here because it's impossible to agree on what actually happened. There's 50 million different versions of what happened during that period. And one of the really positive things that came out of the peace agreement in 1998, we call it the Good Friday Agreement, was this sense that we didn't have to have a fixed idea of things. I have two passports, both an Irish passport and a British passport, and the Good Friday Agreement allowed me to have two identities at once, as many people have here. And some people have even more complex identities because they've moved to Northern Ireland from other parts of the world. And there was a sense for that 20-year period from Good Friday till very recently that Northern Ireland was this in-between nebulous liminal place. And it was kind of working. We were all muddling along. And I guess Brexit and the Brexit referendum came down almost like a kind of wall. And it very much said you need to decide what you are. Are you Protestant? Are you Catholic? Are you Irish? Are you British? What side of the line, the border do you fall on? And that's been a terrifying process for many of us to move through, and quite scary as we think about the future and what that means. So I thought it was really important in this novel, which came out between the Brexit referendum and the actual implications of Northern Ireland leaving the EU or not leaving the EU, depending on which way you look at it, that I would explore language and how we tell these stories that are in between liminal, kind of not quite concrete stories. So I'm going to begin by reading you the very first section of the book, which has probably become the most famous part of the book. People quote it quite a lot. And it's also, I think, a very difficult passage for the translators to translate. So apologies if you've had a go at translating this. But you'll see very clearly that sense of nebulous, unfixed language of a story that has many, many different versions of it and different ways to tell it. Even of this sense of what is truth. It's really hard to pin it down in the context of Northern Ireland. This is Belfast. This is not Belfast. Better to avoid calling anything a spade in this city. Better to avoid names and places, dates and second names. In this city, names are like points on a map or words worked in ink. They are trying too hard to pass for truth. In this city, truth is a circle from one side and a square from the other. It's possible to go blind staring at the shape of it. Even now, 16 years after the Troubles, it's much safer to stand back and say with conviction, sure, it all looks the same to me. The Troubles are over now. They told us so in the newspapers and on the television. Here, we're very great with the religion. We need to believe everything for ourselves. We're all about sticking the finger in and having a good hook around. We didn't believe it in the newspapers or on the television. We did not believe it in our bones. After so many years of sitting one way, our spines had set. We will take centuries to unfold. The Troubles have only just begun. This is hardly true either. It depends upon who you're talking to, how they're standing, and which particular day you've chosen for the chat. Those who are ignorant of our situation can look it up on Wikipedia and find there a 3,000-word overview. Further articles can be read online and in academic journals. Alternatively, a kind of history may be acquired from talking to the locals. Piecing this together will be a painstaking process, similar to forging one jigsaw puzzle from 2, or perhaps 20. The Troubles is too less a word for all of this. It's a word for minor inconveniences, such as overdrawn bank accounts, slow punctures, a woman's time of the month. It's not a violent word. Surely we have earned ourselves a violent word, something as blunt and brutal as apartheid. Instead, we have a word like scissors, which can only be said in the plural. The Troubles was one monster thing. The Troubles are many individual evils caught up together. Other similar words include trousers and pliers. The Troubles is always written with a capital T, as if it were an event, as the Battle of Hastings is an event with a fixed beginning and end, a point on the calendar year. history will no doubt prove it is actually a verb, an action that can be done to people over and over again, like stealing. I'll leave it there, and I do apologise to the translator because I can see even reading that how difficult it is. There's a lot of wordplay in it. So that was one of the big themes I wanted to look at, this kind of idea of fixed truth and lack of fixed truth within a Northern Irish context. The other thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to look at the idea, and it comes up in that passage, of the Troubles both being over and not over. So, when you travel around the world, a lot of people think 1998 ended the Troubles with the peace agreement and everything's fine and dandy in Northern Ireland. And to some extent, things are a lot better than the kind of ongoing conflict that I grew up with, but they're definitely not perfect or resolved. There are a lot of issues. There's a lot of unemployment. There's a lot of mental health issues that I'll talk about in a little minute. And there's also still a very strong paramilitary presence here. If you go out my door and look, you'll see paramilitary flags, you'll see paramilitary murals painted on the walls and the houses around here. The violence is still present, it's still there, and there's still a lot of work to be done. And I particularly wanted to talk about the legacy of the conflict. So we have a term here coined, I think, by Lyra McKee, the journalist who was murdered a few years ago by the IRA. And she talked about the ceasefire babies and the generation that kind of grew up after the peace agreement, or were so young when the peace agreement was signed that they don't remember the violence and the bombs and the shootings that I remember as a child. And the scary thing about that is that these children are still exhibiting signs of trauma. A lot of them are struggling with mental health issues. There are even physical symptoms that you see in some of these young people. They didn't see the violence firsthand themselves, but they're still living with the repercussions of it. And I wanted to address that in this book as well. And the vehicle I used to address that is magical realism. I've always been a magical realist writer. There's an element in all of my novels and short stories. The reason for that is there's a huge tradition of magical realism engaging with social and political issues that I write into. So if you look at writers like Günter Grass, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, even Salman Rushdie, their magical elements were commentary on kind of the social issues and some of the politics within the country that they wrote in. And those are the books and the texts that I grew up with. So I write very naturally with a fantastical element. And I think one of the things that does in a really powerful way is it wakes up the reader. Flannery O'Connor, who is Southern Gothic writer, one of my favourite writers of all time, she has this wonderful quote about, for the hard of hearing you shout, and for the almost blind you draw large and startling figures. And that was her reasoning for writing kind of grotesque elements into her stories. She wanted to shock her readers, to wake them up and to make them see things in a fresh way. And with the Northern Ireland story, particularly the story of the Troubles, it's been repeated so many times that we have to find fresh ways to tell it, to get people to see elements they possibly haven't seen before. And it's wonderful to see other writers from Northern Ireland doing that. We've had such success with the sitcom Derry Girls, and Lisa McGee has done an amazing job of looking at the Troubles through the angle of teenage girls. That had never really been done before. I have friends who are writing amazing environmental texts on what went on in Northern Ireland. I have other friends who are writers who are exploring the LGBTQ experience within the Troubles. There's so many different angles and stories that have yet to be told. My vehicle is magical realism, but it's so heartening to see other Northern Irish writers who are exploring different methods to tell the story in a new way. So I thought I would read you a short passage that's more of magical realist bent now. And I have to introduce you at this point to what I call the unfortunate children of East Belfast. And the unfortunate children of East Belfast, they're all kids who have superpowers, but they're really terrible, rubbish superpowers. And they're metaphors for the ceasefire babies. They're exhibiting some of the signs of trauma in ways that their parents maybe hadn't had, and their parents don't quite know what to do with them. So I'm going to read you The Girl Who Is Occasionally a Boat, which is a story of a little girl, Lucy, who every so often turns into a boat. And you'll see very clearly that the reason she does this is she's being asked to carry things that are much too heavy for her. And that's quite a very obvious metaphor for what some of this generation are having to carry in terms of the trauma from the past. The girl who is occasionally a boat. In a backyard on the edge of Castlereagh, Lucy Anderson is becoming a boat for the third time this week. She stands ankle deep in her sister's paddling pool and waits. Her father's let the hedge grow high so the neighbours can't see. Lucy prefers to be a boat on the river. She likes to glide with the loop-necked swans at Victoria Park. But sometimes the need to change comes on her quickly, and there isn't time for anything but the backyard and the paddling pool with its lurid pattern of tropical fish. Privacy is essential, hence the hedge and the curtains drawn throughout the house. It wouldn't do for some passing stranger, a postman or politician canvassing, to peer through the front window and see her pale face straining from a boat bow, her arms and legs stretched to planks. Lucy waits in the tepid water. She waits patiently while the heaviness falls off her, like damp dripping from wet washing on a line. Her bones begin to ache in the familiar fashion. It isn't exactly painful, the stretching, the twisting, the coming together of separate parts. It isn't normal either. Lucy can't really say what her body's doing right now. Transforming, turning, taking the piss. She's come to call it changing, and afterwards feels like she's been crucified. She won't be able to bend for a week. In the moment, it's glory though. Her bones are made of air, her flesh feathers, and the breath in her lungs is not breath but some lighter substance, helium perhaps, or pure white cloud. Then Lucy is not the dumpy girl she sees in the mirror. She is not hefty, big-boned, or thick of thigh. She sits lightly on the water. She floats. She glides, which is how you'd describe an elegant girl's movements. A ballerina, for example, or a catwalk model. Lucy's become a boat 149 times already. She can't remember her very first change. She was only 2 at the time, her small body discovering some new ability almost every day. Who's to say she hadn't taken it all in her stride, adding boats to walking, talking, and all the other tricks she'd lately learnt to do. Her parents tell her she howled for hours afterwards. It was only a puddle, they say, and tell her the noise she made was something shocking, like matchstick splintering and rubber stretched to breaking point. Her father's never got over the shock. Lucy's body's grown used to becoming a boat now. She's almost 16, and so accustomed to the bone-creaking, skin-yearning sensation of changing, she's stopped keeping track of how many times she's done it. It's a curse she carries. It's a kind of blessing. She wouldn't know herself without it. She wouldn't know where to start. What's the point in being a boat? Lucy's not decided yet. She thinks it's something to do with the act of carrying. People, problems, large, unwieldy things. She refuses to call herself unfortunate, but it would be nice to have a name for what she is, a word for being in between. So that's one of the unfortunate children, and you meet quite a few of them across the novel, and you're not supposed to say you have favourite bits of the novel, but I think the unfortunate children are probably my favourite bit. So the last thing that I wanted to read and talk about was men, and I'm often asked as a female writer why I chose to have 2 male protagonists. My answer to that is always I write about exactly what I want, and it's a deeply unfeminist thing to tell a woman what they can and cannot write about. But I was also particularly in this novel drawn to writing in the voice of men, because one of the huge legacies of the troubles we've faced here in Northern Ireland is mental health issues. It's a really sad fact, but we've lost more folks to suicide since the troubles ended than were killed in the entire duration of the conflict. We've a suicide epidemic here in Northern Ireland. And a lot of the people who suffer from mental health issues related to the trauma of the troubles are men. Men who've seen things, men who've experienced things, men who've done things as well. And a lot of those men are silenced. They've silenced themselves. They really struggle to talk. And I wanted to write particularly about two men who desperately need to talk about the trauma that they've been through and yet cannot seem to find the words. And so I wanted to finish up with this is a kind of, it's an internal monologue from Sammy. He's talking to his son Mark. Sammy has come out of the paramilitary and he's tried to give his children a different life, something better than what he knew. And he's terrified to find that Mark has been sucked into the kind of world he's escaped from. And yet throughout the whole novel, he struggles to tell Mark this, to actually sit down and vocalise, son, I love you, and I'm really worried about you. This is kind of what he wants to say to Mark and is unable to. It's a pretty heavy piece to leave you with, so apologies for leaving you on a bit of a downer, but I'm going to read you a couple of pages of this. You are your father's son, as I was my father's son, and he the same, most likely. Definitely his father before him, who came back from the war and beat a fella dead with bricks for talking shite about the Queen. You've seen him in photos at your nan's. He's the one with the beard and the soldier get-up. In our family, we all have the same face on us. Intimidating's what they call it round here, which is a nice way of saying you wouldn't want to meet any of us in a dark street. It's not just me and your granda. Your uncles are cut from the same old sheet too. Matty's inside and Jim is just this month out. The other two are only marking time. They cannot hold their anger still. They're always looking to ruin something. Even your Auntie Kathleen has a mouth on her like hammers. She once broke a woman's finger for taking the last trolley at Tesco. When she was a wee lassie, she done boxing. That wasn't normal for girls back then. The rage runs through us all, as if we have two kinds of blood pumping side by side, red blood and blood that is much darker. All the way back it goes to the first brute agent who raised his hand in anger and hit. That was Cain, was it not? Did you do him in Sunday school with the other lads, Noah and Moses and your man with the stripy coat? I did. I could see where Cain was coming from, killing Abel. You have to put the competition in its place. A fellow like Cain would do well in the East. Of course, you're not just mine, are you? You've your mother's blood in you as well. Her side are country folk, the sort of people who lift their dinner straight from the field and properly believe in church. They're strong folk like us, but it's a strength for lifting and carrying, not for beating down. You've your mother to thank for your good looks, and the way your hair turns straw in the sun. You're clean whip smart. You didn't get this from either of us. You come at everything sideways, son. It's as if you're standing on a stepladder looking down. This is not to say that you're better than me, and it's not to say you're worse. You just have more options. You're sharp with your mind and sharp with your tongue. If you want to, you can cut people. You do not need to use your fists. And I'll leave it there. I hope that's given you a little taster of some of the themes in the book. And I hope it hasn't put you off. I've kind of read some of the heavier pieces. It's actually quite a funny book as well, and it gives you a real snapshot of where Belfast is now. I also hope you enjoy the rest of the festival, and I'm looking forward to getting to Tirana at some point in the future when things calm down a little bit. Thank you again for having me. Goodbye.